Hey there, and welcome to the Spirituality Podcast, where we explore spirituality and self-development with high-achieving entrepreneurs. My name is James M. Powell, the Spirituality Coach, and if you want to discover how you can experience higher quality outcomes by making higher quality informed decisions successfully, using the number one strategy of the world's highest achievers and top performers, then sign up now at thespiritualitypodcast.com and you'll receive instant access to 7 days of complimentary training, which includes the number one strategy that I've personally used to make decisions that have enabled me, among other blessings, to interview on this podcast some of the world's highest achieving entrepreneurs, including presidential advisors, multimillionaires and billionaires, and globally influential personalities, as well as to share my insider secrets with highly successful entrepreneurs, elite athletes, inventors, high-performing executives, and scientists. So sign up now to get your 7 days of complimentary training to unleash your limitless potential and reach your next level. Now, today on the Spirituality Podcast, we are joined by Jules Schroeder. Jules has been ranked by Inc. magazine as number one of the top 27 female entrepreneurs changing the world and one of the top 40 millennials to follow. She is a musician and visionary on a mission to inspire people to create a life by their own design. As the founder of Unconventional Life podcast, Jules interviews successful millennial entrepreneurs who are authoring their own lives and are committed to the service of something larger than themselves. So with that being said, let us welcome Jules Schroeder.
Hey James, hey everyone. Yeah, excited to do the interview with you. Good to be here.
Hey there. So, how is it being you?
You know, it's been interesting, I would say lately, with everything that's been going on. I almost look at all the things that have happened and, the ebbs and flows of life. And I'm like, how did I do? Like, who was that person that did all of those things? But, I like to say that I live my life in seasons and I have a value on following aliveness. And
Mm.
so, I myself have been very multi-passionate and I grew up with a father who worked Wall Street, New York City, and in the States. And, as a result, it was always like, choose one thing, right? What's your career path? How will you make money? How will you, take care of yourself? And myself, I was like, but I have so many things that I like. Like I like my music and I love business, but I love traveling. And so when I realized that I didn't need to pick something, that I could
Mm.
actually have all of it. And not only that, I found when I started including all of my passions at the table at the same place and time, that's when my success really started to come together. And, I manage it kind of by checking in, like, where's my aliveness? Right now, it's mostly my music. I just put out a new EP a few weeks ago, and I'm going to be releasing 11 more tracks this summer. So I'm doing like a big music Spotify push. But, then after that, I could be back into, we have a big event coming up in Patagonia at the end of the year for a total solar eclipse. So my aliveness will move there. But I think finding structures that support multiple paths to aliveness and the permission to be able to be fluid in them has definitely, been a value of mine and how I make it all come together. So.
Yeah, right. That goes against so much of what has been said about choosing one and stacking on top, master one at a time. And
Mhm.
I resonate so much with that because I posted recently on online an image of a parabolic lens and
Mm.
how multiple rays of sunlight hit the parabolic lens at different points, and because of the angle they reflect and they converge at one single point. And so it's similar to how a satellite dish picks up the signal. It has that box that captures all the different signals, and it all comes into focus on that one point.
Yeah, I love that image. And it's so true though. Absolutely.
Other people say, yeah, this is how it's worked for me, but you actually found out what works for you.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, that's the thing is each of us, we are different. We have our own unique blueprint. And a lot of it is investing the time to learn your blueprint rather than just inheriting or accepting the blueprints that have been impressed upon you. And that's a lot of inquiry and curiosity and discovery. And, something that I might offer or might say, to one of you listening to this right now, like, take it if it works for you. And if it doesn't, then keep going, and keep trying things on. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. How did that start for you? What this path of inquiry?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always just felt different. I grew up as the oldest of five girls, in the States. And,
Mm.
like I said, my dad worked Wall Street in New York City. And, my mom was raising five kids. So my dad would go leave at 6 a.m, come home at 9 o'clock at night. And I really only saw him on the weekends. And whenever I saw him, he tended to treat our household in a lot of ways like it was the boardroom, like it was like back in New York City land. And, I'd come to him with these ideas or these thoughts. And instead of seeing what was right or being like, yeah, like go for it, or like, great, that's a great idea, within seconds, he would see the holes or what was missing. And, as a kid, it was definitely challenging because I'm like, come on, Dad, just give me your approval. But at the same time, I learned to see opportunities or where things were missing. And so it was seeing it, coming back to the lens you described, from a different frame. And that mentality that I developed, as a young person and a teenager, I feel like really started to shape how I began to see the world. And it had me start to be curious in a lot of different ways. And, I got into business at an early age, mostly because I was in an economics class at university, and I saw a clipboard that went around, and it was like, you want to make a bunch of money this summer, write your name and number down. And I did, and I got a call, and they were teaching you how to run your own business, knocking on doors, a house painting business. So that was a whole another thing. So I learned how to go around the neighborhoods and knock on doors, but I became successful at that, and, booked $150,000 worth of work in 3 months. And next thing I knew, I was running a 6-figure company at 18. And, so I started to just, pursue these paths. But it was when I had this near-death experience in 2015, a wakeboarding accident, that after that experience, everything really shifted. It felt like my life, before really being driven by me on my own agenda in what I thought I wanted to do, or a lot of just trying to prove myself, whether it was to myself or to my family members, or, just this sense that I had something to prove in the world, to validate the internal knowing I had of myself. If I could have the external proof in my business, or the money that I made, or what features I was in, or who I was associated with, then I would have, quote, made it. But, the ironic part is every time I got to one of those peaks, one of those mountaintops, my goal had changed. And so I never got the fulfillment or that felt sense of like, wow, I did it, or of accomplishment. And I think a lot of us, we can resonate with this because, whether you're in a particular career path or a transition or a life trajectory right now, like that sense of fulfillment, like that nagging feeling that you might get when you go to bed at night, or you wake up in the morning, or you're on your way to work, in my experience, unless you really address that, like it doesn't shift. Like more external, like accomplishment, or external, like goal setting, does not solve it. And it can be kind of, a mind mess to some degree, because even if you start doing all the right things, maybe you start meditating, or you start prioritizing more time for yourself, for self-discovery, you're like, but why is something not shifting? And then at the same time, it really takes a different level of reflection. And so, that very much came from that near-death experience, I think, is when I really turned that corner in that way.
Yeah, can you describe more about that? What happened? Was it an experience that you had an accident and then something happened? What was that?
Yeah. So, so it was a summer day in Colorado. It was a wakeboarding accident. And I was the sponsored snowboarder before. So I've always been a really big athlete. And I was out with the boys, and it was like, who could get the most air to jump the wake? And naturally, in my competitive spirit, I was like going for it. And I did. I got a lot of air. I launched, and then I face planted. And, I have sustained a lot of injuries before. And so when I face planted, I was like, okay, something doesn't feel, right. But I did like a quick check. I'm like, I think I'm intact. Like all my body parts are still here. Like, I think I'm all right. And, I barely remember the boat ride back to the shore. I got off the boat. I went into the bathroom, and I just remember everything in my body, my neck, my arms, my legs started to go numb and tingly. And I was barely able to get out of the stall. And I just looked at my friend who was outside of the boathouse, and I just was like, something's not right. And she took me to the hospital, and my next memory was really coming out of the MRI in the hospital, being approached by a white figure and 6 black shadow council member, and having this conversation that was, Jules, you have more work to do in the world. Do you want to do it? And at the time, they thought my neck might have been broken. They thought I might have been paralyzed. And I just remember saying, yes, as long as I don't come back as a vegetable. And in that next moment, I felt myself get zapped back into my body. I felt this energy forge my neck back together and shoot down my spine. And since that moment of waking up, like something shifted in me. It was like, like I said, who I was before, life being driven by. And then since life coming through, but it was a defining moment. And, I had to almost learn after that how to integrate this new soul, or it was almost like having a 10-volt battery got supercharged to a 100-volt battery, like how to actually hold that new energy system in my physical body. And at the time, like, I didn't have language for any of this, like energy system in my physical body, like what does that even mean? But I started to, like, reach out to different people, because I was having a disconnect in terms of my nervous system, and how it looked on the court is, I was having all these shake fits, and I felt very detached, or very high and then very low. And so I had to relearn how to integrate into my body. And then simultaneously, I'm being invited to the United Nations. Forbes is reaching out to do a podcast and a column. And so all these external things are happening, but on the inside, I'm having like this existential, so it's just the polarity of life, right? Of like, yeah, I got more work to do. And then life throwing me all the breadcrumbs to do it. But then my soul path being like, hey, we got things to address here. And then, the confusion of how to reconcile that. And, that definitely took some time. And I think it's still an evolving process. So.
Yeah. So that work that you were told you still have remaining, is that more of a like individual thing, or was to have an impact in the world? Were you aware straight away of what that was?
For me, I relate to it is as the world. And so I believe that we are all vessels. We are channels. We are conduits for life force to flow through us, and for our gifts to express, almost as if we are, we have a giant hose attached to the sky, and it flows, through us and then expresses. And it all relates in different ways. But I think part of my path has been to be that vessel for, I relate to it as God, or you could call it source energy, to really flow through me and learn how to hold energy in high volumes such that it really makes a difference and awakens something in someone else. And I guess what I mean by that more specifically is that, we've all had times where someone's reflected something to us, or we're in the presence of someone, and it's almost like you've been in a blind spot, and then something illuminates and you're like, whoa, I never saw that before. Or possibility emerges, like, wow, I never could have considered that was even on the table, on the menu of options, kind of thing. And then, so I feel like a lot of my gifts, particularly through the live events that I've done, and, in the podcast and other ways that it's expressed itself in my music, has been to hold that space so someone gets to see something in themselves, before they've even seen it, and reflect that back. And so I think all of our gifts, work in different ways, but I've dedicated my life to serving that, and to serving the nature of being a vessel and a channel. And that's a humbling process, because we as human beings are wired for ego. We are wired for the I. We are wired for, what's in it for me. And I have been wired that way. And not to say that I don't ever still have my human moments, for sure I'm human, but that, there's really been a sovereignty of allowing myself to be in humility to the craft and the commitment of what wants to come through, even when it's not my preference, even when it's not, my feels like my choice, but like, what is the highest truth here? And that's something I think a lot of us can be afraid to look at, is like, what is the highest truth that wants to come through? And case in point, like, I ended a relationship where nothing was wrong, but in terms of alignment, like, if I really told the truth, it wasn't the highest truth. And that, sometimes those choices are hard. It might be in the job that you have right now, or a career pivot. We know when something's not right, but to actually sync up the actions with the highest truth and serve that more than your own personal agenda, like, that is super counterintuitive.
Yeah, so just before we hopped on the call, I was looking at your website, and I saw you have a graphic with 8 aspects to focus on. And the one that popped out to me was alignment. How does that come into focus in your life? Do you have a process you go through? What are you trying to align yourself with? For example, like you mentioned a higher truth. What is the process you go through to discover that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think for me, I think all energy, if you look at from a scientific perspective, there's the Hertz scale, that actually there's different frequency that's been scientifically quantified, in terms of different energy. In truth, being its own frequency is like the highest, of frequency that ultimately, we can have it. There's also anger and frustration and love and all these other different things. But nonetheless, so for me, that frequency, it's like truth is inarguable when it's spoken. You might not like it, if a friend or a partner, whoever, says something to you, but if you can tell it's embodied truth, you accept it because it's just true. And so, for myself, this was maybe back in 2014, and I had been running this publishing company, and we figured out how to make books bestsellers on Amazon back in 2012 before Kindle, became a popularized thing. And we did a 7-figure launch, and working with us, it was like $30,000 a client. And we helped a lot of personal development authors and stuff to get their message out there. But, a few years into that, I ended up having a business partner embezzle a bunch of money, went into $200,000 worth of debt overnight. And then, like I said, those clients started to refund at $30,000 a piece. And I just remember having a moment, and I was dating my other business partner. So I'm like, we're like trying to unmess this whole thing. And so my initial instinct was like, I need to work harder. And I maybe went from working 8-hour days to 10-hour days to 12-hour days to 16-hour days. And I remember after 8 months of just trying to do more, the answer is like, oh, something's not working. I should do more to fix it, rather than like stepping back and looking at like, well, is my external environment giving me data that I'm missing here? Like, am I missing the point of what's going on here? But at that point in my life, like I was just like, I'm going to start more companies and make more money. And I'm like, whatever. And, the reality is like, it didn't work. I ended up just spinning my wheels and burning myself out. And I think a lot of us can relate to that as well. And so I had this theory that I was like, okay, well, if doing more isn't solving anything, what if I actually stopped doing anything for 2 months? And like, talk about like a complete mind rearrange. I'm like, wait, what? Like for 2 months? So I created this game where for 60 days, my only hypothesis was to see if I could truly figure out like what a real yes was. Like I was so on autopilot of yesing based on what I thought I should do, based on what I thought my responsibilities were. For example, paying back the business, the debt, clients, etc. Like I was just so like in this trap. And so I decided to enroll, a lot of people in my life. And some of you listening to this, you might be like, Jules, there's no way I have 60 days. And I really thought I didn't have 60 days. I've also had a lot of clients, people go through this process in as little as 7 days, and it makes a difference. But I was like, hey, for the next 60 days, expect that I'm just going to be a no to just about anything. Don't expect me to be a yes to social invitations. Don't expect me to be a yes to taking on more things in the business. Don't expect me to be a yes to new ideas or project collaborations or whatever. And it took me 45 of the 60 days to actually start to sync up my awareness on what I was saying yes to with my action. And what I found is a lot of times we say yes to things that are 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10 in terms of what feels good. Like, oh, hey babe, you want to come do some yard work this week? And you're like, or like that friend invites you to a party, but you really just want to be like introverted at home, but you feel like it could be a great networking thing, or we shut ourselves into why it would be, valuable or important. And so like I slowed all of that down. And I find usually when you say yes to those things, the outcome ends up being like a 4 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. Like it's good, but it's never like epic. And then there are these like full-bodied yes invitations that we get in life that when we get them, where it's like, want to be on an all expense paid trip to a beach, like, all of us in quarantine right now, like, instant invitations just to leave if it was safe, of course. But like those 10 out of 10 yeses that we don't even think about, like our body, like we've been compelled to say yes to them. And those outcomes end up being 10 out of 10 outcomes. And so what I found was my inquiry of like, could I just be in the practice of the 10 out of 10s? And could I be willing to let go of the 4 out of 10s or the 5 out of 10s or the 6 out of 10 invitations? And what I found, I got a spreadsheet and I started tracking at the end of every night what I was saying yes to. I ranked it on a 1 to 10 scale. Then I also ranked the outcome. Like, okay, this was a 5 out of 10. Oh, yeah, that actually was a 3 out of 10 outcome. Or actually, and 10 being like super, hell yes, full bodied yes on the scale. And when I started, using that data and really only acting on these full bodied yeses, I started training my environment to let my environment know that I'm a yes to more 10 out of 10 opportunities. And this is like the simple part here is that when we're saying yes to things all the time, God, the universe, like alignment doesn't necessarily know the difference. It's just going to keep throwing you everything. But when you start becoming air traffic control of what opportunities are being presented to you in your life, and you start telling those opportunities, hey, actually, I'm a no to those 3s, and I'm a no to those 6s, I'm a no to those 7s, and only acting on the 10 out of 10s, it's like you might look like you're doing less, more, but then what you do act on takes you further, faster. that's when I find that you start getting more of those consistent opportunities. And I left that 60-day period with a no to just about everything. And when it was after that hypothesis that really my whole company and all these other things started to build themselves, because I had practiced that muscle. And, we're taught how to practice a muscle of going to the gym. We're taught how to practice, certain study muscles. We're taught, how to practice particular career things. We're not taught that intuition and alignment, or instinct is another muscle that if we don't dedicate consistent practice to flexing it, our system doesn't reliably know how to deploy it in situations that matter. And then we're like, oh, I have no intuition, or my intuition isn't reliable, or, miracles seem to happen pretty randomly, rather than recognizing we're the source of these things. But in order to get there, you have to practice it. And so a game like this, where listeners, you could literally for the next week, just chart out for step 1, bring awareness to what are you saying yes to in your life. And the step 2, rank that, and the micro scale. What does that feel like on a 1 to 10? 1 being like, I should stop right now. And 10, like, this is like the best thing of my life. And then notice the outcome. How do you feel when you say yes to those things that are 6 out of 10s? And then what's the outcome of those 10 out of 10s? And then can you start to sync up your action to really only saying yes, and taking action on those full-bodied yeses. And I, promise you, I've seen, clients that have run, multi-million-dollar, even, $100 million plus companies use this simple tool, and the results are profound. And it is like so simple, but if you actually do the work and you flex that muscle, you literally train your environment to work with you rather than always being a generator. You actually get to be the source and the receiver of all the things that are already in your field already. You just give them space in your life to land.
So you made a differentiation between being a generator and being the source. So what do you mean by that?
So I think, as human beings, right, we are often human doings, and meaning that, whether it's like listening to a podcast or you're taking a course or, something with your job or whatever, our answers a lot of the time is if I need something to happen, I should do more to make it happen. I should generate said thing. But what actually is true is that, we have, in my belief at least, we are connected to circuitry, cosmic circuitry, or whether you use cosmic or not, we're connected to circuitry, and that the right opportunities are around us all the time. And I'll say this another way for anyone that's listening to this: anything that you want in your life is available to you right now. So there is no gap between where you are and where you think you need to be in order to have anything that you want in your life right now. All of that is missing is having the space for what is already in your field to actually land physically in your life. And in order to create space, you have to literally do that. If your day looks like 16 hours a day and you're moving constantly on the phone all day, every day, and you're saying yes to everything, there's no way that space is going to happen. You might end up taking, an hour a day becomes your sabbatical hour of the day. And you start with something like that. And that actually starts to give a little bit more space, and will probably be uncomfortable. It surely was for me at first. But in that space, we start to be able to receive and become the source of what's here. And so it's recognizing, you can kind of go with the current or against the current. You can either drive the ship or you can allow the current of the ship, to carry the boat. And so I believe that when you allow your own life force or this own circuitry to move through, you will get further faster, and the results will be unrecognizable. There's been so many times in my life where, even when I was writing for Forbes and I was like outside the hot springs in Iceland, hitting send on my first ever blog piece, I'm like, how did I even get here? Like, this wasn't even like in my 5-year plan. Was I like, I'm going to be a writer at Forbes? It was like on the secret menu. And that's what I think, being in the current opens up the secret menu. It's the stuff that you think that you want to have happen. Cool, that stuff can happen. But then it's the stuff that you don't even know that gets delivered to you. And you're like, oh yeah, I want more of that. And for me, I've dedicated my life to being in that flow because it's more interesting, and all of it in a lot of ways is just practice. So.
Like training your environment, that's a very interesting concept. You train yourself in order to train your environment, right? Like you're talking about this cosmic circuitry, the universe responds to the human being. Okay, so in terms of the original being, like, or God or source, being like the source of all life, then when you stand in the position of the source to the existing world, right, to the universe, then how do you see yourself in context, in that relationship with those three components, basically, you know, the source, you as the source, and then the results around you?
Yeah, totally. So I definitely feel like I'm the vessel in a lot of ways. Like I'm not God, nor do I pretend to be God or life force, you know, in that way, but I get to be the space, right? That life force gets to come through, and then the conduit for how it then expresses externally in my environment. And I think with that relationship, so it's like, okay, if I'm the vessel, I'm like air traffic control, right? For, you know, God energy or source energy to come through me and create itself through me, then it's also my responsibility to pay attention, you know, to how it's landing. Like if you're air traffic control, say at the airport, right? You got to see like, how are the planes actually hitting the runway? You know, you have to like, otherwise there's a traffic jam and like, you know, the planes can hit each other. So there's a responsibility of actually seeing how it expresses in the environment. Like at the end of the day, you know, we're physical people, physical bodies on a planet in human form with skin and bones. And so we have to integrate it. And if we don't integrate it, you know, then we, it stops. And so I guess what I mean by that specifically is our environment is often giving us different cues. And, you know, sometimes like I remember there was a time where I was getting funding from a project a few years ago, and I kept trying and trying and trying to make this thing happen. And it was like no after no after no. And, you know, in one degree, you know, I can look at that and internally I knew something wasn't right, but it was like, I was so attached. And here's the other thing, we can be committed to something, but sometimes we're so attached. I was like, it has to come in the form of funding. That's going to be the thing that actually gives me the results I want. But the truth is that it wasn't aligned. And so every time I kept getting those no's, my environment was giving me feedback. And I think resistance in our life can often be a good indicator, a good form of feedback, is if you are perpetually trying something and it keeps not, you know, getting you the result. I usually look at that as an indicator to hit the pause button and to be like, hey, am I missing something? Am I one, either too attached to the form, such as like, if I don't get funding, my business doesn't work. There could have been a million other ways. I could have started a crowdfunding campaign. I could have, you know, like pre-sold something. There were so many other ways I could have brought money into the business, but I was like, it has to be in this form. It has to be fundraising. So that's the first thing, the pause button. Am I attached to the form? Is there something else that wants to come through here? And then inside of that, it's being willing to course correct. You know, it's also being willing to say, can I change a variable here? Is there one variable that needs to shift? If it is, can I adapt and can I make that pivot? And you know, let's say you have a business right now or maybe you're starting a business or something like that. And, you know, you're asking yourself for a creative project in your life, like whether it's music, you know, sometimes you have to be willing to recognize when you get persistent feedback from your environment, it's not always a cue to like push through or bulldoze forward, but to hit pause and actually step back and be like, hey, okay, like my environment's like, you know, telling me something, what do I need to do? And then the last part that I'll say is that, you know, our environment, we train our environment. And so this also comes to the relationships we have in our life, and it comes to the ways we spend our time, and it comes to the ways we give our time. And so I hold a belief that, you know, if we don't have something in our life, like one of the great ways to look is what's the environment around you. You know, like I hold this view in terms of our networks of conversations that we have, but it's like, you know, if there's always a story and you always hear everything coming out of people's mouths, like there's never enough money, or, you know, like I'll never get to where I want to get. Or you just hear people always saying, God, like it's so hard all the time. I also hold the belief that we're radically responsible for our environment, not that we're changing people, but in my life, like if someone's like to me, like, hey, you know, there's never enough money, I will pause and I'll be like, well, actually, that's not true for me. I think there's an infinite amount of money. And like, are you choosing to want to receive it or not receive it? And so I think there's a lot of ways we have to be responsible, not only for ourselves, but look at it as a systems approach. You know, like what's our environment telling us? Can we pause and course correct and listen? Let our environment know, hey, we're on the same team. I'll listen to you when you give me data. And then two, train our relationships and the people in our life to work with us in that, such that we can be more responsible for what's around us.
So you had your near-death experience in 2015, but you also mentioned you're a Christian since your childhood. So how is that awakening or this near-death experience that you had in 2015 affected you as a Christian? Has that changed that in any way?
You know, I think for me, I, you know, really held this like process for me of God and love. But I also, there's something to get a concept intellectually, and then there's something to experience something. And, after that experience, I was present to more love than I feel like, it's how I relate to it, that like, it was not of this earth. Like after that experience, like there was, I've had no fear of dying, or no fear of, like, it was like after touching that, in some degrees, it was almost like, why am I still human in a body? Like it was so good over there. Why am I back here? So for me, I think in a lot of ways that really, affirmed, my belief that there is something else experientially. And, and then inside of that, like really solidifying my faith and my relationship to, God. And I also, I go to a church that has, both a rabbi, and a pastor and a spiritual teacher. But I think love in terms of frequency is something that I got to experience, and that, is definitely my North Star.
So in terms of love, and talking about frequency of love and truth, in the Bible, talking, and also spiritual traditions, talking about the light of love and the light of truth. So obviously light has frequencies, has different frequencies and different colors depending on the energy content of that frequency. So what does that mean for you? Like when you talk about the frequencies of light and of truth and love, because you clearly have very scientific understanding of, or viewpoint on your spirituality. So I'm just curious how that works for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, like love is, it's just such a pure thing. Like when I think back to, that experience that I had and the place that I went to and that accident, like it's just pure, like coming back to truth. Like it's unquestionable. It's just felt. And it's one of the reasons why I love art and music so much, is because I feel like it cuts through, it literally cuts through the mental or the filters that we have, and it penetrates, it creates feeling. And, at the end of the day, I'm in the business of what makes someone feel something, and I'm in the business of transformation. And I find that it's little micro pattern interrupts, whether it's art, or you are having a particular day and you hear a song, or, you read something in a book, or you see maybe even some street art, and it just touches you, like almost like it takes you out of where you've been. And inside of that, those pattern interrupts, I feel like those micro shifts pop us out of our experience and allow us to actually connect to ourselves and our meaning and why we're here. And so I think love, in so many ways, I write a lot about love in my songs. If you check out any of my songs on Spotify, but it's not just like human love. It really is it's this sense that, for me, I almost feel it's like being like swaddled as like a baby, it's like this pure settlement and safety and this knowing. And so I think in 2020, especially for those listening to this, it's our duty to use art and creativity to cut through the noise. So many of us have been so desensitized from all the chatter, and that's all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, which is why I think even slowing down and, this COVID-19 and everything that's happening here, it's allowing us to feel more of what's been under the surface, more of ourself, more of the world, more pain, more pleasure, more everything. And, I think that, we're in a co-evolutionary phase where we're asking collectively to step up and bring our gifts and our love in ways that might not have historically been appropriate. Like you're not going to go bring a ukulele to a business boardroom when you're pitching, right? Like some client, but like also now I've actually have brought my ukulele into, $100 million plus like Asian billionaires and got them to sing at a dinner table. And that fostered way more business because they opened up that way. So I think we're going to start to see less of this compartmentalization and more of this inclusion and more of each of our own self-expression, each of your own self-expression is going to become a requirement moving forward, to really capture someone's attention. It's those who make people feel something, that like awaken something in themselves. Those are the people that you'll pay attention to. And those are the people I think you're already paying attention to. If you slow down and you look at where does my time go and what actually matters, we're all getting to get a better relationship with our time now because we get to see like what actually moves the needle versus the pile of things that we, maybe thought did.
Going back a number of years, I did a spiritual training course in Glastonbury in England. It was a group meditation over a series of weekends, and I experienced what the earth feels like in space. It felt like you were talking about a baby being cradling in its parents' arms and a feeling of secure love. And that's really what I felt like the earth felt like in space. It's not just hovering or somewhere in nothing. It's being cradled with love. And that's how I feel about the planet now as well, that it has room to breathe. There's so much less pollution going on right now. I think it's just a great time that Earth can just take a moment to relax. And so I'm just curious what you mentioned about COVID-19 and how this is affecting the world. What's your experience or perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I think in line with this conversation, it's giving space. I think that, the theme obviously of this conversation has been, around spirituality, and then also looking at, consciousness to some degree as well. And I think we are in a collective uprising. I think we have been at an era where, over the last, when I started even in 2011 in my first business, like the entrepreneurial conversation didn't really exist. I remember I was like, even in 2016, telling stories and calling it the unconventional life. And people were like, what is that? And now here we are in 2020, people are like, the unconventional life, like, duh, like we get it now, And so new conversations are being brought into the space, and more consciousness is evolving. We're becoming more aware of our environmental footprint. We're becoming more aware of our economic imprint. We're becoming more aware of our human imprint, like how many people are actually on the planet. And so in this awareness and this consciousness uprising, what's natural with more light, there's an equal and opposite amount of dark that gets carved out. It's a cyclical relationship. And so I think what's happening in the planet is we're going in a lot of ways through the purification. We're calibrating. As we've been expanding, we must contract to create more space to consequently have more light on the other side. But you have to zoom out and see it cyclically. And that's not to dismiss that there's real pain alive right now. There's real death happening. It's not to dismiss any of the actual impact. My business, like, we were going to bring 500 people on a cruise ship this summer in Italy for entrepreneurs and creatives. Sounds like a, Saturday Night Live skit at this point, so like I'm in the impact too. There's real impact that's happening. But at the same time, if you zoom out, we are making way for more space to then inhabit. And so don't forget, with just as much breath that is happening, in what's being created in the world, that, we will come back into more light, but we have to just allow it to move through us. As vessels, we have to allow the energy, even systemically or globally, to circulate and to cycle. And so, so my belief on what's happening is it feels in line with the process, and we will get through it, and there is impact. And frankly, if anything, I feel like our planet like put the foot down and was like, we're not getting there fast enough. We're going to bring this thing and we're going to shut everything down, and we're going to like, massively accelerate to really calibrate in the way that we've needed to with the amount of growth that we've had. So I think it's really fascinating and unprecedented and challenging and all the things. So
yeah, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and so grateful you could be on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I loved all the inquiries that we went down, and if anyone's interested in, more of these types of conversations, Unconventional Lives on iTunes and podcasts and all that kind of stuff, or if you connect through art like I do, feel free to find Jules Schroeder on Spotify and, follow along there too. So.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. I look forward to speaking to you again, hopefully in the future, and you take care, and God bless.
Awesome. Thanks so much, James.
Hey there, thank you for listening to the Spirituality Podcast. If you want to discover the #1 strategy being used by the world's highest achievers and top performers to awaken blessings and unlock the next level, then subscribe now via the spiritualitypodcast.com to get instant access to your 7 days of complimentary training. Sign up now at the spiritualitypodcast.com and get instant access to your 7 days of complimentary training.